Right now, there's an explosion inside Russia. The people are rising up, the Kremlin is losing control, Bashkortostan is challenging the authorities. The streets are boiling, Putin is trembling. The people are saying, enough! The bunker regime is cracking at this very moment. China is taking back its territories, the Far East is slipping out of Putin's hands. But who will become the new master of the region in these very minutes? A bloodbath with China for Asia? This is incredible news for Ukraine. Stay tuned. Urgently, Putin has fabricated an encirclement to cover up the catastrophe at the front. Propaganda is screaming about success in Kupyansk, but in reality, it's a meat grinder for Russia. The Ukrainian armed forces have already started to close the trap. Russia is in shock. The Ukrainian sky is now under impenetrable protection. Germany and the United Kingdom have made a brilliant move. The latest air defense systems are already on their way to Ukraine. The Kremlin is in a panic. The Kremlin's grand plan has shattered to pieces. The front has been blown up, the enemy's offensive has been thwarted. The Ukrainian armed forces have snapped shut a fiery trap. The occupiers are in panic. Near Pokrovsk, the Ukrainians have done the incredible. These images have leaked online, orgies to the Russian anthem. Aged Kremlin gentlemen have created a debauched paradise right in the heart of Russian power. Putin and his entourage have turned the Kremlin into a nightclub for aging perverts, hiding behind the flag and patriotism. All this and more in our next episode of Hotspot. It has happened. Russia is falling apart from within. Bashkir is breaking the chains of Kremlin power. The people have risen up and Putin's system is coming apart at the seams. A region where thousands have died for the Kremlin is now rising up against the bunker dweller. Putin is losing power right now.
Bashkortostan has become a source of cannon fodder for the Kremlin. The Russian elite sends Bashkirs to the front without caring about the losses. As a result, Bashkortostan leads in the number of deaths in the so-called special military operation.
The Russian Empire will soon cease to exist, and then our peoples will finally gain the long-awaited freedom. Everything is being decided right now. The time has come to act. Don't stay silent. Rise up. Fight for your independence. Freedom to the oppressed peoples.
This is an address from the soldiers of the Bashkort Company. The unit is fighting on Ukraine's side in the International Legion. Meanwhile, in Russia itself, the company has been declared a terrorist organization. The company's symbol is a flag in the national colors of Bashkortostan, but in a different order. Just like on the old flag from the time of the Bashkir struggle for independence in 1917 to 1919, it is complemented by a crescent in the center. The Bashkirs are helping Ukraine defend its independence and dream that this very independence will come to their own home as well.
The Republic has its own oil, gold, copper and industry, and all of this, Moscow siphons it all off for itself. And
the Bashkorts themselves are rather poor, and
we live in poverty. They take everything away. All of this should be ours. They can't live without us. They won't be able to manage without us. We will succeed.
But the Bashkir struggle is taking place not only at the front, but also behind the lines. The underground movement in Bashkortostan has been active since 2022, and it's overseen by that very Bashkort company.
There are activists, people who are under our guidance. They work for the good of their homeland, that is Bashkortostan. And honestly, sometimes I find myself wondering about this very question, and it's something that weighs heavily on my mind. It's hard to say, and I often reflect on it, who is truly in greater danger. Us, the soldiers and fighters who are here right now, physically present in Ukraine, standing on the battlefield at the front lines with weapons in our hands, facing the immediate threats and dangers that come with active combat, or civilians that are carrying out certain tasks when literally anyone around them could be an enemy.
Because of the enormous risk, all operations of the Bashkir underground remain secret. But sometimes footage of their struggle appears online. For example, the burning of the Russian Empire's flag in January of this year. And from time to time, symbols appear on the streets of Bashkortostan that are hard to miss. And for example, transformer substations just happen to catch fire.
Arson attacks on transformer substations, workshops, and factories that work for the defense industry. After that, we have information that work there came to a halt. And it stayed that way for a long time. We also had an operation to plant explosives on a bridge.
The underground does a lot of work, but very carefully. Many operations will only become known years later, and some the world will never find out about. But every single operation, even the smallest one, is a step toward the freedom of Bashkortostan, and they will achieve it.
Russia is losing the Far East, Moscow is at war, and the region is slipping away to the Kremlin's former allies. The Chinese economy, North Korean migrants. Putin watches in panic but does nothing or is unable to do anything. You can find all the details in the following report.
Russia is losing the Far East, unofficially but in reality.
Without any exaggeration, the Far East has become the most important factor in strengthening Russia's position in the world, our flagship in the new global economic reality.
While the Kremlin is preoccupied with the war, China and North Korea are quietly dividing the region with Russia.
I would call it a creeping takeover, a creeping migration. For now, control over the Far East remains in Moscow's hands, but there are more and more Chinese there, and they are playing an increasingly significant role in the economy. But today they play a major role in the economy, and tomorrow they will play a major role in politics.
More than 1 trillion rubles in investments from China sounds like help, but it's all centered around trade, not the development of the region.
China needs to use Russian resources on the cheap, and accordingly they will have that opportunity. And that's why I think this economic dependence of these regions on China will only continue to grow.
Also, the Chinese have long ceased to be guests in Russia.
Vladivostok is simply not needed. It should just be given to the Chinese. That's what they want to do. The Chinese can just come in and that's it. No one here will resist anymore. There will be no one to resist and nothing to resist with.
According to various estimates, up to 2 million people live from Vladivostok to the Urals.
This is called settling these territories with Chinese people, and in various forms at that. This includes both the migrants themselves, as well as mixed marriages. Children are born from these unions. And accordingly, this connection grows stronger and stronger. These regions are becoming increasingly tied to China.
Now, about North Korea. In the Far East, just in the past year, more than 15,000 North Koreans have officially arrived and unofficially up to 50,000. And that's not even the limit. Another 153,000 new labor contracts have already been ordered.
There isn't enough domestic labor in Russia today because so many people have been killed in the war. And accordingly, demographic problems still remain. So yes, there aren't enough of our own people. And in this sense, North Korea is an excellent supplier of labor resources, because these are disciplined people who accordingly know how to march in formation in every sense of the word.
So it turns out that Moscow has handed over the region for temporary use. But why is that?
We need people who, as he sees it, are easy to control. It doesn't matter, even if not directly, but through intermediaries. That's why he's confident that these people won't start a revolution, won't protest against Moscow's actions. He thinks these are very convenient people, and it would be good if Russia were populated by just such convenient people. Otherwise, with their own kind, who knows what could happen?
But everything comes at a price. And the longer the Kremlin turns a blind eye, the more important the question becomes: who is really running the Far East?
In reality, today, of course, Russia is essentially a vassal state of China, a position which China primarily uses as a strategic tool to exert significant pressure on Europe. And we clearly understand that the ongoing global confrontation is, of course, not simply between Russia and NATO, no, but rather it is a much broader and more complex struggle, one that is actually between China and the United States, China and Europe. In this particular case, we are referring to today's Russia as we know it today. It's like a guard dog that obeys all the commands of its master.
Well, what happens next? Could the Far East return to Moscow's real control, or the opposite? The influence of China and North Korea will only continue to grow.
The influence of China and North Korea will only increase, and accordingly China will make its own decisions. Will it even be necessary for China to legally take all this under its control? Or is it enough to have, let's say, complete economic control today, and tomorrow that will become total control, political control?
It seems that while Putin is focused on seizing other people's territories, he is gradually losing his own. And what's ironic is that these territories are being taken not even by enemies, but by the Kremlin's own allies.
There was also an explosion near Kupyansk, by the way. Russia is once again spinning its myths about encirclement, but it's just another hallucination of Putin's propaganda. The Kremlin is frantically making up fairy tales to cover up the disgraceful collapse of the front. Our defenders are holding their positions with an iron grip, turning the enemy into ashes and smoke. The whole truth about the Kupyansk meat grinder for the occupiers, which Moscow is afraid to hear.
The battles for control over the city of Kupyansk, a major transportation hub in the Kharkiv region, are ongoing.
The situation in Kupyansk remains difficult, but these days there is more control. On our side, we continue to defend our positions.
Against this backdrop, Russian propaganda has once again released another batch of fakes. The bunker dweller claimed that Ukrainian troops in Kupyansk are not surrounded or blocked.
In the city of Kupyansk and also in the city of Krasnoarmysk, the enemy forces ended up being blocked and completely surrounded. By the way, I discussed this particular issue in detail with the commanders of the relevant group, making sure that all aspects were carefully reviewed. They don't mind. Andrei Ivanovich, at this time, they do not mind at all allowing official representatives of the media, including both international foreign journalists and Ukrainian journalists, to enter into the encircled zone. This is being done so that these journalists and media representatives can personally go in, observe, and see with their own eyes exactly what is happening there. They will be able to witness firsthand the current situation and the actual condition of the Ukrainian troops who are now surrounded within that area. And so that the political leadership of Ukraine would make the appropriate decisions regarding the fate of its citizens and its servicemen.
But these statements have nothing to do with reality. This is the painfully familiar old Kremlin tactic: media blackmail and an attempt to demoralize Ukrainian society.
As of today, I currently believe that the situation has stabilized. I hope that our security and defense forces will be able to do everything to ensure that Kupyansk is not captured by the enemy. In
reality, this is not an encirclement but heavy local fighting.
The main direction of the occupiers' attack is not Kupyansk itself, but Kupyansk-Vuzlovye. The occupiers' plans include the possibility of establishing control over this key railway station. As
of October 30th, Ukrainian forces retained control over most of Kupyansk and the key transportation hubs. Russian occupiers have entrenched themselves in small groups on the northern outskirts of the city and in the western part, creating a foothold for further attempts at an offensive.
in other words, they are trying to change their tactics and strategy of combat operations in urban environments. It is fundamentally different from the tactics used in Bakhmut 2.5 years ago, when the occupiers deployed a large amount of armored vehicles and, accordingly, the so-called local assault tactics to establish control over this settlement.
The main threat remains the northern directions and the enemy's attempts to break through to the highway, Kharkiv, Kupyansk, Svatovi. This route is vital for supplying Ukrainian units on the eastern bank of the Askati. Russian troops have been unable to approach the city from the south and east. The main supply route for the AFU remains through the Kupyansk-Uzlovoy railway station and the embankment dam across the Oskol. The dam is periodically subjected to enemy airstrikes, but it remains operational, and the pontoon crossings serve as backup routes.
In other words, the main goal and strategic objective of the occupiers is not to advance deeper into Kharkiv region, but rather to repeat the scenario of 2022, when the Izium group of occupiers was considered one of the most combat-capable and aimed to achieve the operational encirclement of Ukrainian units, precisely in the area of the Slovyansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration. That is the main goal. In other words, the strategic objective of the occupiers is to establish full control over the territory of Donetsk region.
But the enemy has run into the tough defense of the Ukrainian armed forces. Counterattacks by Ukrainian troops are holding back the Russian advance.
At the moment, Ukraine's defense forces are conducting counter-sabotage operations to prevent the penetration of Russian occupiers further into the urban area and to prevent them from gaining direct control over the key hub of Kupyansk.
Kupyansk is not just another point on the map, it is a symbol of resilience, endurance, and military stamina. The Russian army is trying to wear the city down, but the Ukrainian defense is holding strong. And no matter how much the Kremlin tries to pass off wishful thinking as reality, the truth is on the side of those who are defending their home. And step by step, they are driving the enemy out of Ukrainian land.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Ukraine is receiving a real surge of support from its Western partners. The United Kingdom and Germany are deploying the latest weaponry to strengthen air defense. The Ukrainian sky is now under reliable protection. All the occupiers' criminal plans are being shattered to pieces.
Russia is ramping up strikes on Ukraine's energy system and changing its attack tactics. Moscow is launching hundreds of drones capable of penetrating air defense systems and equipped with cameras featuring enhanced targeting.
Russia has turned strikes on Ukraine's energy infrastructure into a systematic operation aimed not just at temporarily damaging the grids, but at destroying the viability of large areas of the country. On the eve of winter, the goal of the attacks is to deprive regions of heat and electricity, undermine industry, provoke mass emigration, and create political pressure on Kyiv, writes The Economist. In
these conditions, air defense becomes critically important. But this year, Western partners are acting proactively, strengthening Ukraine's skies and energy system before the cold sets in. We
are not just now starting preparations for this winter season. We began preparations back at the end of the previous winter season.
As early as November, the UK will begin mass production of Ukrainian air defense drones. This is the essence of the joint project between Kyiv and London, designed for the rapid protection of the skies from enemy drones and missiles.
our Ukrainian friends will share their technologies and intellectual property with the UK, and in turn, we will further develop them and produce them on a large scale so that we can supply Ukraine with thousands of interceptor drones every month, said El Karnes, the UK's Deputy Secretary of State for the Armed Forces, in Parliament.
These drones will become part of a system called the Air Shield. It will integrate Western air defense systems such as Patriot, Airstream, NASAMS, as well as new mobile installations. These are being provided to Ukraine by Germany and other allies before the start of winter. The first drones will be tested by Ukrainian military personnel. If the tests are successful, production will be expanded, and some of the drones will likely be manufactured directly in Ukraine. At the same time, the UK authorities are expanding their multi-purpose missile production program. It is planned to deliver 5,000 units of this weapon to Ukraine to strengthen its air defense. We
are also announcing an expansion of the production program in the UK to provide Ukraine with 5,000 new multi-purpose missiles. This will create new jobs in Belfast and other cities, as well as strengthen Ukraine's air defense for the coming winter.
At the same time, European allies are increasing their support for Ukraine's energy sector. Germany and other NATO countries are mobilizing resources, from air defense missiles to support for the energy sector, so that Ukraine can withstand the winter and not succumb to attacks on critical infrastructure.
Germany has already paid 390 million euros with another 30 million. We agreed on this in the summer, but today I want to announce that we will invest an additional 30 million. Thus, we are providing 450 million euros. This money will make it possible to acquire the necessary technical equipment to save Ukraine.
In addition, EU countries are preparing a winter support package. To the already provided 3 billion euros, a new guarantee of 800 million has been added for the emergency purchase of gas. This was reported by the EU ambassador to Ukraine, Katarina Maternova. The aid covers the repair of power grids and the supply of generators and transformers. We
have also provided and continue to provide a lot of assistance in the energy sector, not only generators for people and businesses, but also transformer and compressor stations to help restore power grids, gas distribution networks, and compressors that supply gas from storage facilities which have been distributed. We also provide financial support to state enterprises and major energy companies for the repair of their equipment. We also supply more than 2 gigawatts of electricity per day.
Thus, support for Ukraine this winter is reaching a new level, from modern air defense systems to reliable energy supply. And whatever the Kremlin may be planning, Ukraine, together with its allies, is striving not just for tactical success, but for a strategic one, to withstand the cold, to preserve strength, and to maintain the ability to defend itself.
The front is ablaze. The armed forces of Ukraine have driven the enemy hordes into a deadly trap. Pokrovsk and Kupyansk have become hellish traps with no way out. The enemy's offensive has stalled. Kremlin soldiers are either stuck in place or fleeing without looking back. Fiery traps are snapping shut one after another. The Kremlin is in shock. Putin's carefully constructed plans are falling apart, and propaganda can no longer keep up with inventing new myths.
Ukraine is once again in the occupiers' crosshairs. The Russians launched a massive attack with missiles and drones. Tensions are also rising at the front. The most difficult situation remains in the Pokrovsk direction, where the intensity of fighting is high. A large number of occupiers are concentrated there. The Russians are trying to gain a foothold by any means necessary.
The main tactic of Russian small assault groups is to attempt to create an operational encirclement of Ukraine's defense forces directly in Pokrovsk itself. At the moment, the actual line of contact is at the key defense points of Ukraine's defense forces, the so-called CTD. Despite the extremely difficult situation, Ukraine's defense forces are carrying out successful counteroffensive actions. And at the moment, the area under the control of Ukraine's defense forces has increased to 200 square kilometers.
Fierce fighting continues in the Kupyansk-Kharkiv region. The occupiers are trying to gain a foothold in the northern part of the city. However, there is no talk of any encirclement of Ukrainian troops. The situation in Minohrad and its surroundings is also fully controlled by the armed forces of Ukraine.
At the moment, the main efforts of the occupiers are not aimed at blocking the Ukrainian defense forces, not directly in Kupyansk, but rather at the possibility of breaking through to the Kupyansk rail yard. The occupiers need control over this key railway station in order to use the short logistics route to the territory of the Russian Federation, and from the territories of the occupied districts of Luhansk region, to form a strike group whose goal will be to advance along the Oskil River towards Sloviansk and the Kramatorsk agglomeration.
Meanwhile, Putin has come out with a new scare tactic. The bunker dweller continues to talk about the successful tests of Russia's so-called wonder weapon.
These are the Poseidon unmanned underwater vehicles. They also have a nuclear power plant.
For the very first time, we managed not only to successfully launch it from the carrier submarine, using the starting engine as planned, but also, importantly, to activate the nuclear power unit.
However, Putin did not provide any evidence, details of the tests, location, route, duration, or any other specifics.
Not according to the rules, not according to the rules. Petrol. Not in serial production, not put on combat duty. Therefore, there is not the slightest basis for talking about any threat from these mythological Russian Wunderwaffes to the NATO bloc or the United States itself.
But despite this, the alcohol president Medvedev called Poseidon a doomsday weapon and at the same time threatened Belgium with a nuclear strike. Let us recall the Belgian Minister of Defense stated that if Russia strikes the country's capital, NATO member states will level Moscow to the ground.
This is nothing more than an information ploy to which Western allies have stopped reacting. And the reaction of the Russian Federation's ambassador to Belgium to the statement by that country's defense minister is quite telling, as it demonstrates complete confusion and unpreparedness for such a tough statement from one of the members of the NATO bloc.
Against the backdrop of the Kremlin dictator's loud statements, Donald Trump has moved to action. The American president has instructed the Pentagon to resume nuclear weapons testing.
On the nuclear weapons tests of the United States. This is a tough military response from the country and President Trump to such information attacks from the Russian Federation. Moreover, Trump very firmly stated that the United States possesses the world's leading nuclear capability. Russia is in second place and China is conditionally third.
At the same time, the US has begun a large-scale reduction of its military presence in Eastern Europe.
On the one hand, while announcing such plans during the rotation period, let me emphasize again, the United States is increasing its nuclear presence in European countries. Let me emphasize again, this includes the redeployment of the nuclear arsenal to the United Kingdom, the redeployment of nuclear submarines, and the presence of an American aircraft carrier in the territorial waters of Daki. In other words, all of this actually points to a strengthening of the US military presence near the immediate borders of the Russian Federation.
A scandal that made even the walls of the Kremlin tremble. The entire power vertical is in an erotic frenzy under the glitter of medals and speeches about spiritual values, with champagne flowing and the lewd amusements of aging officials. Even the main Russian pervert himself regularly makes use of the paid services of ladies of the night. Don't believe it? See for yourself.
The double standard of family values in Putin's Russia. This is only at the microphone, under the spotlight, in front of the cameras of their tame propagandists, the Kremlin's master and his entourage preach about high morals.
Family values remain truly unshakable and deeply important for us, for Russia, and for all of its citizens.
I would like to express my gratitude to you on behalf of the Russian Orthodox Church and personally from myself for your unwavering attention to the spiritual life of the people.
We don't need foreign values imposed on us. Did you destroy your own? Let's see how all this ends.
For the entire Russian society, roads are extremely important. Traditional family values.
Behind the scenes, everything is completely different. In the best KGB traditions, they set up honey traps for their enemies. Meanwhile, they themselves have fun with women of low social responsibility, or simply put, escorts. And we can only guess at the scale and methods preferred by these elderly perverts. I
do everything so that I can be divided. I love it. Thank you, thank you.
Amazingly, the country's chief moralist came to power through a high-profile sex scandal in the 90s. At that time, Vladimir Putin was investigating the case of Prosecutor General Yuri Skuratov. Footage of him with 2 escorts was broadcast on the Central Channel News across the vast country. The authors of the book, The Tsar in Person, claimed that the revenge against the law enforcement officer who had started investigating theft in the Kremlin was orchestrated by a young FSB colonel.
The whole point is that it was Yeltsin himself who was behind the attack on Skuratov. And the person appointed to carry out this dirty mission was another visitor to the presidential chamber, FSB Director Vladimir Putin. At the beginning of 1999, the parliament controlled by the Yevras refused to dismiss Skuratov. That's when Putin and the women who entertained the man resembling the prosecutor general in a safe house in central Moscow were brought into the case.
Today, FSB Director Vladimir Putin told journalists that the scandalous videotape showing a man resembling Skuratov is genuine. In other words, it is indeed the prosecutor general who is filmed on it.
My opinion on this matter is well known. It coincides with the opinion of the president and the prime minister of the country. Yuri Ilyich must resign.
According to Navalny's team, this case became the trigger. The KGB practice from the Cold War era of setting up honey traps, in other words, sending women to seduce the right people, has been actively adopted by Russian officials against their own domestic opponents.
I realized that I had fallen into that very honey trap I'd only ever heard about in movies until now.
And as for Limonov, I think he even benefited, 67 years old and with a young woman.
While Putin's own inner circle, and this despite the fact that the true lives of the oligarchs are kept under lock and key, are not averse to having fun with prostitutes. And the younger they are, the better. To the delight of Russian investigative journalists, some of them, for example, Nastya Rybka, even wrote an entire book about her escapades. And based on the numerous videos she published, Navalny, who was still alive at the time, was able to determine when, where, and with whom the girl and her friends had their fun. This is how it became known not only about the escort girl's connection with Putin's favorite oligarch Deripaska, but also with Sergei Eduardovich.
This is Sergei Eduardovich Prikhotko, Deputy Prime Minister of the Russian Federation. Prikhotko is not widely known, but he is an extremely influential Russian official who has spent his entire life working in public service. In the late 1990s, he worked as the deputy head of the presidential administration. At that time, the first deputy head was, by the way, Putin was an advisor to President Yeltsin, then to President Putin, then to President Medvedev, and to this day, he heads the government apparatus and serves as Medvedev's deputy. Prikhotko is considered a specialist in international relations and is regarded as perhaps the most influential official in this field. Not Lavrov, but specifically Prikhotko.
Rybka even wrote in her book that in terms of status, Sergei Eduardovich is above Deripaska.
Ruslan backs down before him. He never argues with him, always listens to him. And Dad is the only one Ruslan never jokes with. Who is this person? Who could a billionaire be afraid of? It was Dad who was dressed as a border guard at the very beginning. The border guard is in charge of the billionaire, and the billionaire can't get a word in when Dad brazenly flirts with his woman. What is this? I'm puzzled. Dad disappeared back on the deck. Such a mysterious figure. It seems that Dad was taken away before the yacht even docked at the shore. As I understood it, he couldn't even go ashore with Ruslan, for some strange reason.
Well, after this story with all its real details stirred up the media, the girl admitted that there wasn't just one escort girl in Prikhotko's bed.
She wanted something from Prikhotko, and she understood that basically she needed to get it through sleeping with him. Well, honestly, that's what all the girls in Moscow do, so why keep going to the movies with him?
So was Kshusha the only one who went for Prikhotko?
Why only Kshusha? Let's put it this way, everyone understands that people of a certain status and wealth, even if you don't know who they are, I honestly regret that I didn't sleep with Prikodko.
But the departure from traditional values, even though back then in Russia people weren't making such a fuss about them, didn't affect either the presidential administration official or the oligarch in any way. Moreover, not so long ago, journalists uncovered yet another of Deripaska's preferences: intimacy with underage virgins. And since there weren't many of those around, the pimps resorted to tricks.
They regularly performed a procedure they called refueling. The girls, schoolgirls, including the main one, Lisa Popova, who is the key figure, were also given it. Sometimes it was a packet, sometimes it was a special syringe. Before sex, they would inject it into the vagina, and at the moment of contact with Pupina, there was a red liquid there. It would leak onto the sheets, and the girl would pretend that she was in pain. She was taught what to say. The scouts, including Titova, did this. All of this is in the testimonies, in the case materials. And the victims also told us about this, that they were taught to act like virgins, to show blood and so on. Sometimes they were also given special substances, pills or burnt alum. These are also inserted into the vagina. They constrict it to imitate virginity. And this is quite a painful barrier. There are many conversations in the case materials where the girls talk about it, complain to the engineer about how much it hurts, how bad they feel, and they're told, just endure it, it'll pass, it's not a big deal.
Deripaska's perversion, which borders on criminality, is intertwined with prostitutes employed by Rosneft, the presence of elite prostitutes at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum. The immorality of the Russian elite is seeping out from every crack. Yet at the same time, without batting an eye, they convince Russians that the most important thing is upholding traditional family values.
That's all for now. For more breaking news from the front, tune in to the next episode.